Nope, he's not, but I did see him crossing the street the other day. Like, what's that?
I would take you.
So, starting this summer this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know.
It's the most important part.
Let's go.
It's permanent.
Take a piece of glass.
Oh my God, it's time to throw that shirt out.
It's so funny because she's looking at you like this.
But you can buy another shirt.
Okay, I saw her, but she's already done. Should I get her last name?
No, it's not.
You don't even you want a whole beach day.
San Diego.
Well, we never break down.
Like her last day, so
Yeah.
she's like, do you have one where I'm less sleepy? And I'm like, that's how you
That's
look.
pretty. I like that.
I go, that's how you look.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Now no one wants. So we don't have to have to be there.
But like,
I think we
Actually,
I know what's happening.
it's about how much time I have, you know? Yeah. I would not.
Hi, we'll get started.
City manager's coming in.
Are you? I can come in when you're ready.
You can do that.
Okay. You ready, Eric? We're going to coming to you live in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for coming today. I'm City Manager T.C. Broadnax, and earlier today, I had the honor of presenting my proposed budget to the Austin City Council, as well as the mayor. As federal funds have provided through the American Rescue Plan Act, they expired and or are expiring. Sales tax collections essentially flat. And the full effect of the property tax caps that we've talked about over the last few years, approved by the Texas legislature, have come to fruition. Harsh realities have set in on municipalities around the state, and Austin is no exception to that. The $5.9 billion proposed budget aims to prioritize critical needs in this community, also sets a cautionary tale for how we need to approach our investments going forward, and now more than ever listen to Austinites as it relates to focusing on how to prioritize our limited resources. This budget focuses on and has an Austin-focused approach to it. It's also focused on frontline related efforts around our staff and the services that we provide, as well as future-focused, understanding the new financial realities and uncertainties as we move forward. And for the first time in the city's history, we're presenting and share today with the City Council a 2-year balanced budget that allows us to have a much more long-term viewpoint as we approach funding in the current year to ensure that we can sustain the efforts that we're proposing in the 2025 budget through the 2026 budget. And so I'm hopeful that we'll have a very lengthy discussion this year on what that future looks like and begin to really prioritize with our community and the council how we'll move forward in these times where resources are strained. And I'd like to invite Ed Vanino, our CFO, and our budget officer, Carrie Lang, to the podium to talk a little bit more about the proposed budget and answer any questions that you may have specifically.
So I would just speak further to what the city manager said about some of the fiscal challenges not only Austin is facing, but cities across Texas are facing in the wake of a lower property tax limit, which is our current reality at a 3.5% increases. You're seeing cities across the state needing to cut their budgets, needing to reduce services in order to live within that limitation. Here in Austin, we're blessed with a robust and strong economy, and we've had very conservative fiscal practices in the past that have allowed us to avoid that. While we have very limited funds to address new funding priorities, we've been able to maintain the funding priorities that our council, in alignment with community priorities, have put in place over the last decade. So I think that's a good news story for the city, that we've been able to maintain the progress we've made in recent years. Carrie and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
With the financial challenges that you all are talking about, what did you ask of specific departments in terms of taking a look at their individual budgets?
So as we went through the budget process, we asked departments to look at and do a real scrub and look at potential 1% reductions. But when we looked at the department's budgets, we were able to really balance. There were very minimum reductions, no reductions to service areas, no reductions to any services given to the community. Many of the reductions that were proposed were minor reductions, such as maybe some IT or some small programming reductions, but nothing that would be impactful to the community or to the services that were being provided by the departments.
Can you talk a little bit about this 4% proposed raise for city employees? Where does that money come from, and is it enough given how expensive Austin is?
So as we were looking at the proposed increase for employees, we worked really closely with our HR department to identify what that impact or what that increase should be. And our HR department actually works with us to make those recommendations. And so that 4% increase is based on what we see other government agencies provide across our partner or our comparing municipalities. And we know that it is a tough environment for our employees, but as we are trying to remain marketable, we are proud of our ability to give that 4% to our employees for the next fiscal year.
In terms of kind of funding some of the priorities you've been talking about, can you just share a little bit about how y'all ended up settling on numbers that were able to address some of those, but also taking into consideration that taxes and fees folks are going to be paying about 5% more this year, so balancing affordability for residents with where you got the city services to?
So when we looked at balancing the budget this year, we really wanted to make sure we, as Ed mentioned, that we wanted to make sure that we tried to make sure we did not reduce any service levels to the community. And so when we looked at the general fund, the balancing of the general fund really meant that we looked at taking care of employees first. We looked at how we could allocate costs to one time. So many of the things that you'll see in the budget, you'll see a lot of one-time allocations. With our enterprise departments, as they were looking at the increases to their rates and fees, it was for expanded growth. So if they had growth in their in their customer base. They had to address that growth. And so many of those increases were to address that growth in customer base. So the 5% increase was across all rates and fees, including the property taxes. We really try to take a look at all of our rates and fees as well as our property tax bill to try to be as affordable as possible when we're looking at the total fees and bills for our community overall.
Every year there's usually some conversations about potential increases to the police department's budget, and this year it's looking like there's about an 18.2 million increase, and I was just hoping you could share kind of how you landed on that number and what that increase is going to go towards.
Yeah, so the police department's budget, when you think about the police department's budget, they have the second largest number of civilians in the general fund. They have about 600 civilian employees. And when you think about those increases, so those civilian employees receive wage increases, that 4% wage increase. There is the insurance increase that all employees receive, the cost of insurance to all employees, and so that those increases, as well as some of the internal services costs that goes across all departments, and so that reflects some of the increases in the police department's budget. There is the legacy liability payment for the police retirement system that's reflected in their police department increases, and so those are the increases that are the results of that $18.2 million increase you see in their budget.
On the topic of the reserve level, I know that you set this budget with that kind of 17% level following up on last year. Sure, we're going to hear more about that in the next few weeks, but could you just share possible positives or negatives, or just what it would look like if that number were to change?
So the city's policy, we proposed a budget based on the city's financial policy of 17%, and we will rely on the leadership of the council to determine where we land at the end of this the approved budget. It's staff's recommendation to go forward with the policy of 17%. It's not just the reserve policy, but when we look at our reserves, we've had things like Hurricane or Winter Storm Mara or Winter Storm Uri allows us to respond to those kinds of disasters. When we had COVID, it allowed us to respond to that, and so we rely on those reserves heavily as we have these kinds of unpredictable things happen across our community. And so the reserves are important in allowing the city to have a response mechanism. But as we continue these discussions, we'll rely on council, and we'll try to lead council and come up with the best solution for the next fiscal year, and addressing the needs of the community and council, and finalizing what the reserves will be.
Just add to that.
Sure.
Just wanted to add to that response, because part of what I've been saying on this budget is it's not always just about the budget that's before us. It's about where we've come from and what have we been doing over time to get to where we are. And of course, we've been funding a lot of new priorities and initiatives, and we're maintaining those. One of the priorities was to increase our reserves as we've seen more natural disasters, whether it be the pandemic or the ice storm or the snowstorm, and under a 3.5% revenue cap where we have less flexibility on our tax levy, we have increased our reserves. We've gone from 12% to a 17% reserve over the last decade. And so I don't ever want to lose sight of the fact we're talking about 16.7 versus 17 is kind of what council's discussion is right now. The policy is 17, so that's what staff's going to propose as a budget. But we came from 12, and over the last decade, we've significantly bolstered our reserves to be in a better position to handle disasters that might come our way.
If sales tax revenue remains flat like it is now, at what point is the city going to need to start really making some heavy cuts to its budget?
I don't think we should presume anything there. I don't think we should default to the idea of cuts. It's not just about sales taxes. It is a challenge. The sales taxes grow at kind of a historic norm of maybe 4 to 5% instead of the 20% that they've been growing at. That does make balancing a budget more challenging. Property taxes are about half of the general fund revenue. That's capped at 3.5%. So, all in, our general fund revenues might grow by 3 3/4, 4% per year. but in a high inflationary period like right now, when wages are going up 4% to maintain our competitiveness, and we've seen increases above 4% in health insurance costs, it does make it a challenge. But one thing about Austin's economy is it never ceases to surprise. I think everybody. I've been with the city for 15 years, and I've seen the skyline dotted with cranes for 15 years, and they're still there. I counted them on my way in today. There's still 8 or 9 cranes up in the skyline. This year, somewhat surprisingly, given that development is down somewhat, we saw a historic high for our new construction value. So people are still coming to Austin. They're still investing in Austin. We have a robust economy, and we will continue to seek ways to balance our budget without having to cut services. But there is longer term, we're going to have to look at tax rate elections. That is part of the changes to tax law envisioned a need in certain circumstances to go above a 3.5% increase, and there's provisions to allow for that requires us to go to the voters and seek their approval for additional taxes if needed to fund the services that our council and our community are asking for. So I don't want to just go right off. If sales taxes don't continue to be strong, we'll have to make budget reductions. I don't know that that's the case.
Following up on that, there's been a lot of talk about a potential tax rate election coming up. When do you expect that could happen? Are conversations happening about, is this 2 years away, 5 years away?
I don't know if it's 2 years away or 5 years away. I mean, that's ultimately going to be a city council decision. Our forecast shows that we are balanced, as the manager said, doing a 2-year budget. What we presented to council today is balanced this year. It's also balanced next year. What the future holds beyond that, I think it's, we can't speak to that today.
Question for TC. Obviously, Austin and Dallas are very different in a lot of ways, but could you just speak a little bit to how your first budget process here compared to what you were doing up north?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we had proposed this year, obviously that we did while I was in Dallas, again, the first iterations there as well, was a 2-year balanced budget approach. And so I think Ed and Carrie and the team rallied around some desire to want to do that, to provide some stability as well as some continuity and understanding around what we're funding, both to the council and the community. Same issues and challenges with pandemic and other types of natural disasters. And so as Ed stressed the importance of reserves, I think Dallas similarly had the same kind of outlook and perspective. Things are a little different. The economy works and ebbs and flows a little differently here in Austin, so I'm excited about what that holds for us in our budget future. But we are going to have to take a hard look at our expenditures, and it doesn't mean service reductions. It may mean just looking at things that we may not need to do any longer to push forward with things that we actually have heard we need to be doing more of. And those conversations will not only occur during these next several weeks as we adopt this budget, but I'm hopeful that they'll continue with the community and the council throughout the year. And as we get to every budget year, as we talked about the forecast, I want to make clear that while years 3 and 4 and 5, as Ed and Carrie and we've shared with the council, look as if we're going to have challenges, understanding the 2-year budgeting process will allow us to bring a balanced budget for that now 3rd year that looks out of structural balance into financial balance, and it'll determine whether we seek new revenue sources. I know you talked about TREs. That is not something that obviously, as Ed shared, we would be proposing at this point in time. There are a lot of other things that we should and could be looking at, and those will be council decisions. But a lot of similarities, and there are a lot of differences, but all communities throughout this state are really going to be challenged going forward. And with federal dollars drying up and commitments that have been made with some of those federal dollars, honest conversations with the community about things we're not going to be able to continue to do will be on the horizon for us to have this year, and probably this year during the budget process, along with over the next calendar year.
Mr. Brodnick, you
sorry, I'm echoing here. You kind of laid out the 3 priorities on how you build your budget. Can you talk a little bit more about what that Austin focused is and what some of those things, what some projects fall within those particular themes that you were?
Sure. I think you heard a little bit from the council members around their focus, particularly on resilience and equity, ensuring that people who live here today can afford to live here tomorrow, as well as the community budget that was presented. There are a lot of things in that budget that really speak to, I think, the values and I think the intentionality of what people believe we need to be focusing on. That doesn't mean we have to choose one thing over the other in all cases, but truly try to be reflective of what we hear from our constituents. And so again, I think this next year for me, as well as our team, particularly knowing where we're headed financially, will really be pivoting to really trying to make sure that we can get to the root of a lot of the challenges that we've had, but also begin to chip away and address long-standing issues in this community, maybe even in front of some of the newer things that people may want to do, but really try to address how the community spoke to us in the past. And so that's what Austin Focus means.
That's all we have time for today, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Have a good day.
I have